You can have, depending on the size of your study or the design of your study, you could have some as small as 5 participants in your research. Okay, so for example, there's a study design study that for if you're conducting interpretive, it's called interpretive phenomenological analysis. You need as low as 5 to be able to do the research. Whereas for some studies, you need up to 30. So it varies depending on the size you need. And for focus groups, you might need 1 to 3 focus groups comprising of 7 to 9 participants per group. That's the size you need. If you're doing a case study, you might need just 2 case studies that you will study extensively. If you're doing an ethnographic study, it depends as well. You might have as many or as little to explore, because what you really need is information power. How much data do I have? It's not about the statistical power in qualitative research. And as you can imagine, the sampling logic for qualitative research is definitely non-probability sampling, and it's really to prioritize depth over breadth. So we want to know how deep, in-depth study as opposed to the breadth of the study. Unlike quantitative research, qualitative research is very flexible when it comes to sample size. It's very flexible. The sample size may evolve during data collection. So, for example, you can start out to say, I'm going to interview up to 30. And then by the time you interview 20, you realize that actually no new information is coming up. You've already achieved information power. Then you stop at 20. Okay, you can say, oh, I want to interview 25, and then you get to, again, you get to 15, you realize, okay, no new information is coming up. You decide, oh, actually, I want to interview 16. And then by the time you get to the 16th person, you realize, I think new themes are coming up. So let me extend my number to 20. Again, it goes both ways. It's not fixed. It is very flexible. For the outcome focus, we want to understand the meanings, the experiences, and the context of people's lived experiences with respect to the subject that we are trying to research. So that's the whole point of the outcome focus. And when to stop, it is when saturation is reached. In other words, no new themes are coming out. Now, in terms of sampling technique, so there are different types of sampling technique, and I have put up here an example of the different types of sampling techniques that could be applicable to qualitative research. So there is purposive sampling, where you select participants based on specific characteristics relevant to the research question. So for example, survivor of domestic violence is an example of a sample that you purposely just want to sample that. There's snowball sampling, and this refers to participants from where participants refer others from their network to the research. So for example, migrant women are participated in research, and then they refer their other migrant women to participate in the research. There is theoretical sampling, and oftentimes this is guided by themes already published in literature or themes concepts emerging during the study. So you want to do a sampling to contrast a theme. So it's possible to do, but it's often not common, but it is a type of sampling technique that is used. Now there's maximum variation sampling, and this is where you select participants to capture a wide range of perspectives. So you have participants from different ages, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, because you want to have different views, and that's why you're having maximum variation sampling. It is not because you just want, it's not purposive in this context, it is not specific, it is you want to ensure maximum variation in your sample size. And contrast to that is the homogeneous sampling, where you just focus on a group that shares similar characteristics. So for example, first-year medical students, you just focus on that group. That's an homogeneous sampling. Now there is convenience sampling, and this is where you select participants who are easily accessible. Now, again, I've given an example. Interview attendees at an event. They are there, you have access to them. It's very easy. Now, quota sampling is another type of sampling technique in qualitative research, and this is when you select participants to fill predefined subgroup quotas. So 10 men and 10 women. It's just a quota. That's what you're choosing. And there's obviously critical case sampling, where you choose highly significant or illustrative cases to do your research or to collect data from them. And there's targeted sampling. So targeted sampling obviously refers to selecting participants from a specific predefined subgroup. So for example, Nigerian women between the age of 18 to 25 using domestic violence services. Very specific. You target those people. Now, the question that I guess some people might be asking is, can you combine sampling techniques? The answer is yes. So in my research, I have combined. So for example, in the past, I've actually used targeted sampling combined with snowballing sampling and combined with convenience sampling. So the thing here is, as I talked yesterday about the methodological rigor, you have to have a documentation of the decisions you make. Why? Why are you choosing to use this sampling technique? What is the point? How are you ensuring that you're not just choosing people? So if you think of the subject of domestic abuse, it's a very difficult subject. It's very hidden. There's a lot of shame in it. So it's not possible to just have people waiting in the wings. You have to get everyone you get. So when you do convenience sampling, because this is people I have access to, and then you have a targeted sampling because you go to the group where people that those groups exist, and then you target them, or you ask people that have already participated in research, can you refer people that you think may be interested in the research? So now it may not really work, but the point here is you can combine sampling technique to ensure that you are maximizing the opportunity to recruit people into your study. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, in terms of data collection methods, I have again put up here some description to kind of like just give you an idea of the different types. So there is in-depth interviews, and this is one-on-one open-ended conversations exploring individual experiences and meanings, right? And so predominantly I use individual interviews, but I also do focus group discussion. So again, this is focus group, like it's a group interview. You have 7 to 9 people. As an example, you have different groups. There's a moderator that explore collective views and social dynamics. There is participant observation, where a researcher immerses himself or herself in a setting to observe behaviors and interactions over time. So for example, a qualitative researcher could explore the experience of nurses or nursing students interacting with pediatric patients. And so one of the things that could happen is they would just sit in the A&E waiting room and just document how they engage with them. Another example could be somebody doing research to understand the consumer behavior of senior academics, as an example. So maybe they go to the shopping mall and just sit down and see where they go, what they eat, when they eat. It could be you just observe the behavior of participants. There is also document analysis, which is also another form of data collection method in qualitative research. And this is where you review reports, media outputs, policy documents, diaries. You would focus on different, like the specific things you want with respect to your research question. There's narrative inquiry as well, where you collect personal stories to understand how individuals make sense of events. And then of course, I think I've alluded to this earlier on about ethnography, so like long-term field work to study cultural practices and meanings within the group. So usually people would go there, especially in sociological studies. You go to the group, you go to the community, you go to the village, and you live with them and you understand what they're doing. Now, I have to say that each of these methods have different types of analysis technique. So one shoe size does not fit all. That's something you have to bear in mind. Again, it goes back to your research question, as we decided yesterday or discussed. You also will need to have like the design. You have to decide what type of analysis technique goes with the data collection method you have identified, and how does this relate to what you want to find out. In other words, the overarching goal of your work. Okay, so now I have just put up here again a brief overview of data analysis technique. They are very different, and they lend themselves to different types of data collection method. So the first one is thematic analysis. So I use thematic analysis in my work because most of my data comes from individual interviews as well as focus group discussion sessions. But it's really about identifying, analyzing, and reporting the patterns. And this is the technical word here would be themes within the data. Then you have grounded theory that is used to inductively actually develop a theory from the data you've collected. And then it's an interactive coding and comparison process. There is content analysis, which is a systematic way of coding and categorizing data to interpret the text that you have as part of your data. Obviously, there is narrative analysis, and I think I spoke earlier on about narrative inquiry. Again, it's about exploring the structure and content and meaning of participant stories. There's this course analysis as well. There's a type of data analysis technique, and there is framework analysis that is used usually in policy analysis. Now, these are just an overview to give you an idea of what things look like, but by all means, you can check and decide which ones would fit well with your work and is appropriate for the data you've collected and your level of expertise, or even if you need to acquire new skills in terms of what you want to find out. So for the rest of our session, I am going to walk through an example. I'm hoping that once we finish, we would have enough time later on to ask as many questions as we want. But let's just start with, the worked example that I wanted to share. So now I have started by talking about key considerations. So before you do research, obviously, you know that you have to get ethical approval. So we do ethical approval for all of our studies. And then you decide the sampling technique you want to use. How do you want to sample your population? What population do you want to use? And this is, of course, working on the premise that you've already identified your research question. You've gone through the 5 steps that we talked about yesterday. You've identified your research question, you understand what your goals are, you have your specific objectives ready, you know the philosophical paradigms underpinning your research, and you have processes in place to ensure methodological rigor in your work. And so this is now the other side of implementing all the groundwork you've already done. So you want to decide the sampling technique you want to use. So in my case, like I said earlier on, I use targeted sampling, I use snowballing sampling, and in the past, I've used convenience sampling. Now, in terms of data collection, I typically do individual interviews, and I develop an interview guide. So it's called an interview guide or a topic guide because my interviews are usually semi-structured. So in terms of the structure of interviews, so we have 3 key broad categories. There is the structured interview, there is the semi-structured, and then there is unstructured interview. So unstructured interviews, for example, would be when you tell somebody to tell you their personal stories. So in terms of earlier when I talked about narrative inquiry, for example. So unstructured interviews would work within the context of narrative inquiry. Because if you say to somebody, oh, where were you in 1984? That's it. And then they just tell you, oh, 1984, I was in this place, I went to this place, I talked to this person and all that. And so it's just that unstructured, they just go on and on and on, which is a form of data collection. Now, for the structured one, usually it's not very common in qualitative research to have structured interview, but it does happen a few times. And that's where you have people asking specific questions, guided questions, nothing else beyond what I ask you. However, for semi-structured interviews, it's somewhere in the middle. So you have a topic guide, in this case, interview guide, written documentation that guides the interview process. So when I say to somebody, where were you in 1984? And they say, 1984, I was in this place, I was in that place, I was in this place. I could then go on to say, what did you do in this context? And they say, well, when 1984 this happened, the government, this is. I then guide that conversation using the guide that I have already developed to make sure that they stay within the confines of what I want to discuss. Now, interview guide is usually informed by literature review as well as the research question. So again, it goes back to what you want to find out. So you're not just going to ask random question because you just want to have a conversation. This is done within the scientific principles of research. So you want to make sure that your interview guide aligns to your research questions, helps to achieve the goal of your study. And in my work, in terms of data analysis, like I said, I use thematic analysis. And within thematic analysis, there are 2 broad categories. So again, from yesterday, if you remember the organogram that I shared, there's that thing about the strategy, the research strategy that says inductive, that the data comes from within, the interpretation comes from within the data. So there is inductive latent thematic analysis, and there's inductive semantic and thematic analysis. So for the inductive latent one, you're not taking what they say at face value. You're walking through the different things that people say, and we are using that to interpret the data. Okay. So again, as I said, I'm going to walk through examples and show you how we arrived from, from what people said up until what I arrived at, based on my researcher positionality, my understanding of the literature, the philosophical perspectives and the paradigms that I've achieved, the goal, where I want to, everything, how it actually informed the data analysis process. So again, this is just to give you an idea of the different phases. So I use thematic analysis that, like I said. Now, there are different types of thematic analysis, but the thematic analysis technique that I usually use is one by authors called Brown and Clark. So they have this 2006 paper where they describe the process of doing inductive latent thematic analysis. And that's the process that I use. So on the screen, you will see the 6 stages of the process of conducting thematic analysis, familiarizing yourself with data. Now, there's something I need to mention about data. It's about the transcription. So sometimes you transcribe the data yourself. Sometimes you get someone to transcribe for yourself, for you. Sometimes you pay a company to do the transcription for you. Now, in some of my research in the past, I have done the transcription. For example, for this particular study that I'm giving you as an example, I did the transcription myself. Now, this posed a methodological issue of bias because I did the data collection, I did the data analysis, I did the transcription of the data, I did the analysis and then the interpretation, the same person. So the question is, how are we sure that you've actually did everything correct? Because there is no check in the middle. There is no one else to check that the data is actually what you say it is. So what I did was I had peers, like peer debriefer. I had people as part of my team that checked a section of the data that I transcribed to make sure that, okay, what I transcribed was what they said. Okay, so these are ways you can work around these methodological challenges, because sometimes you don't have money to pay somebody to transcribe your data for you, and you don't have the time even, but you can put in structures to ensure methodological rigor. And like I said yesterday, I used NVivo to facilitate the analysis process, and that actually also added a layer of separation, a degree of separation. So there was an audit trail of how I did the teams, and I was able to explain it as well. So like you can see the phases, you familiarize yourself with the data. So I transcribed the data myself, I read and reread the data, and actually I noted down initial ideas. And then the second stage was to generate initial code. So based on the data you have, you can have like to just pick a few, like a sentence, to give you an idea of what the data look like. And you need to do this in systematic way to guide the process of your analysis. Now, the third phase here will be to search for themes. And this will build on the second phase, which is to make sure that all the codes you've selected, actually you gather them together and you begin to code them into teams, so you could see the emerging themes. Now, when you get to stage 4, which is where you check for themes that work in relation to the coded extract, so the first level, which is stage 2, then you look at the entire data set, that's level 2, then you put them together in what is called a map. So again, I'm going to give you an example of that, I think, in my next slide. And then you want to define the theme. So that's stage 5 of the phase 5, is to actually define the themes, because you then combine each of them, level 1, level 2, and then you look at specific themes for each of them, and you generate very clear definitions and names for each themes. The 6th stage phase of this thematic analysis technique is to make sure that you report what you've done in a way that is very clear. You have specific examples, you put in selected extract from the analysis to actually show the process of what you've done. So I just want to, again, mention this. I said this earlier on. So according to Brown and Clark 2006, they said that inductive approach data analysis is a process of coding data without trying to fit it into a pre-existing coding frame or the researcher's analytic preconceptions. In this sense, the form of thematic analysis is data-driven. Okay, so you want to focus on that, and you want to make sure that that's what you're doing. And then, of course, they describe latent analysis as identifying the underlying ideas assumptions, and conceptualizations and ideologies that are theorized as shaping or informing the semantic context of the data. So in other words, you as a researcher, even though you collected the data, you are involved, you are the one that came up with the research question, you adopt a stance that sort of like separates you from data because you want to make sure that the data is the one that is speaking as opposed to what you think the data should say. Okay. So now let's look at the worked example. So this is the data extract from one of the interviews that I conducted. So this person said, people who are in marriage make it look like you are nothing if you're not married. They make a lot of noise about how great they are, and that's why they are married. They rarely tell you the truth, but label you as impatient if you leave. So in the level 1 initial code, I deduced that from this person is talking about societal views regarding marriage and worth of a person, and they label you as impatient if you leave the marriage. So those were the initial codes that I got from this extract. Now, as I said in phase 4 of reviewing themes, you look at the level 1 is to work out codes according to coded extract. So you have each extract, and then you combine the extract to form a bigger picture. So in this instance, this is an extract that I did for just a data, extracted it, look at the initial code that I applied to that one. And then this is an example of a map, okay? So if you think of it, we have the 2 initial codes, societal views regarding marriage and labeling as impatient. So we have here, now by the time I got to this map, I'd already looked at several other extracts that had similar ideas and assumptions coming forward. So these are the ones in the square bracket are different types of initial codes, but then the one in the over circle are the themes from phase 4 that I want to take forward. So marital problems like domestic abuse, domestic violence and abuse is a personal problem. So that was a recurring initial quote for several people: fear of divorce, shame of being left by the perpetrator, being blamed and labeled as a bad person, stigma attached to divorces and divorce, learning the white people's culture of calling police for husband. These were all initial quotes that then combined. So if you think of the square boxes as level 1 code, and then there's over ones as level 2. So I combine the data from the different data extract to get these 2 codes, the 2 ones in bold and over. So society views regarding marriage was something that was happened to people, and then there was a community gossip as well, like the husband left them, they blamed them as a bad person. That was fear of divorce, that was the fear of the stigma attached to that. All of these meant that people gossiped about them, but there was also the view of the society about them. So you have those 2 teams that have been defined in like phase 4 of the thematic analysis I was going to take forward. Now, this is this phase 5 basically of thematic analysis, where I now have candidate themes that I was going to take forward to define them. So this will take us to stage 5 now. So you have the societal views regarding marriage as a theme from the previous slide, and you have community gossip as a candidate team. So those were 2 teams that came from the big square section on the left is initial quotes from the data, which is the things that I put in the previous slide. Now, some of these actually came together because it was part of what they said. So if you think of fear of divorce and stigma attached to the divorcee, it was part of the society views regarding marriage, but there was also fear of divorce and stigma attached to the divorcee that was a part of community gossip. So you see that there were overlaps in terms of how people were describing these experiences and what it meant for them. So personally, they felt like, oh, the society thinks you're a bad person because you left a relationship. But then they also say, oh, they gossip about you because, they blame you because you're a bad person. So you could see that these things are coming from different aspects, but talking about the same thing. And what this meant for participants was they wanted to save the marriage. So the defined theme at the end of phase 5, the theme that I identified from all of these things they were saying was that they wanted to save the marriage. It It wasn't that they wanted to leave. It wasn't that they didn't wish evil because of the stigma, the concerns. They wanted to save the marriage. So that was the defined thing from this example that I put up. Now, but that was not the final thing, you see. It wasn't. So I gave you that example to illustrate a point. By the time we combined that data from that initial stage of, if I go back, this was where we started from as an example. People in marriage make you look like you're nothing if you're not married. They make a lot of noise. That's why they rather tell you the truth. So that was where, so this is an example of, I obviously gave a name to the participant, like to protect the identity. So this is what Abike said, but what Abike said is not unique to her. There were several other people that had similar thing, which took us to this section and then took us to this box that has the defined theme of saving the marriage. So because of the stigma, the shame, being labeled as a bad person, they decided they wanted to stay in the marriage. Okay. But that was not even what the final theme was. The final theme, having looked at all the data set that we collected from the number of women that participated in the study, the final theme was Nigerian socialization. So it was very interesting that we moved from saving the marriage. We actually moved from this initial code of society views about the worth of a person, labeling you as impotent for leaving the marriage and all of these other bits, and to the saving the marriage, to actually go to that third order interpretation where we recognize that what they were actually saying was how they were raised as Nigerians. Because by the time we looked at the data in the context of the literature, it was really about how they were raised as Nigerians. So it wasn't really about them saving the marriage as it is. It's not really about them wanting to stay. So it was like, I was raised, first and foremost, I needed to stay. So you could see that when I look at the overarching theme that we came up with respect to that particular subject that I gave you as an example, Nigerian socialization emerged as the big one. Now, under that, it was prioritizing saving the intimate relationship, because some of these people were also not married. They were, part of an intimate relationship that broke down, and they had related sub themes of children, children's success as reward for suffering, the negative impact of domestic abuse on their children. And these were all part of the way they were raised as Nigerians. And so I just want to use this as an illustration of how, if you do it properly, you go from these unstructured data, somebody not even making sense, and everything just being all over the place, to a systematic approach to analyzing the data. And this is why, when it comes to qualitative research, there's a lot of work that the researcher have to do that you cannot just outsource to software. You would use software to help you with the process of simplifying the data, but in and of itself, it is not a replacement for the researcher. So it's very important to actually bear this in mind with respect to how the interpretation of data is dependent on the expertise of the researcher, the understanding they have, as well as how they are able to put in and focus on what is very important here. Now, I would like to show this as part of the next stage for what I meant, right? So if you think of this particular strand, so this is at the end of the day, there were 4 themes from the old study, but I have, again, like I said, I have taken the first theme to do the example here. So, but there are 3 other themes that emerged. Now, what I did was, I mentioned yesterday that when it comes to qualitative research, we are not looking to generalize findings. Rather, the focus is really on transferability of the findings, the application of the findings, using it to either modify a theory or to eliminate a theory. So this is an example of how that worked. So there is the sociological perspective on domestic violence and abuse. So that's the sociological theory of domestic abuse. And the sociological theory of domestic abuse in its original form said that gender, so where you see the role of immigration status, that's gender. Gender was there as the main thing that informs the experience of domestic abuse. So it was really about gender. The root cause was about gender. However, based on my data, I was able to modify this perspective with respect to findings from my study. So for example, the bit in bold so if you look at the row, the left-hand side where you have socialization from country of origin, You have the feminist perspective and the family's values perspective. Then you have the integrative perspective on the far right side. Now, the feminist perspective says, yes, um, it's patriarchy that is a problem. But from my study, I was able to refer it back to the Nigerian feminist perspective instead of the white feminist perspective that I hear. And the way to explain that Nigerian feminist perspective was the findings from the study that says Nigerian socialization as part of that theme. But I have broadened it out because I was modifying a study. I was modifying this theory, so I broadened out beyond just Nigerian socialization to say socialization from country of birth. Now, because I was doing this study in a country where the study participants were immigrants, the literature actually shows that if people were socialized within collectivist societies, their experiences were significantly different to people that were socialized within individualistic society. And chances and well, based on emerging evidence anyway, the way they behave in their country of immigration was consistent with the way they behave in their country of socialization. So an example is, I mean, country. So either you were born in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, Italy, Japan. If you were raised within an collectivist society, the pattern of behavior was very similar to that country of origin. And we have a lot of studies done with South Asian women in the UK that actually confirm that they still behaved as they did, where they were, how they were born and raised in their country of origin. So that was very clear. And my study was able to confirm and add to that data. The second bit was, if you see in the middle, I have something where I called community groups and faith-based organizations. And I have put down there because that was something that also came out from my study, that because of their socialization from their country of birth and because of the acculturation in their country of immigration, people were going to the community groups and faith-based organizations for help. Now, this is something that was very unique, and this was a bridge, and this was something that came out significantly clear in my research. And I was able to actually modify this theory to include evidence from my research to say we need to improve our understanding of things. And then, like I mentioned earlier on, where I have the role of immigration status, it was really the role of gender that was there for the original theory. So this actually takes us to this very clear understanding that sometimes, yes, you may not be able to generalize the findings from your research, but you can use it to modify a theory in a way that you can actually speak and use that theory to inform future work. So I am going to let us go on a 15 minutes break. And then when we come back, we will spend the rest of the time we have answering questions. So this, according to my time, is 10:43. So if we come back by 11 o'clock, we can then spend the next hour answering questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. So we have about 17 minutes to take a break and answer the questions. You can start typing in your questions on the chat so that we can put it together for the facilitator. Oh yes, yes. I believe that was a very insightful session. I have a few questions myself, so please put it together so that we can get the best from the facilitator as much as we can. So we'll see in about 16 minutes time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much. So we see the questions already, and she will attend to it as I read. Please, the slide presentation is not clear. Okay, don't worry about that. We'll have the presentation. We'll have the presentation slide as well as the recording. Oh, sorry about that. The slide was not moving. Okay, so we have a question here. Thank you so much, Ma. In a study using convergent mixed method, that means you're using both quantitative and qualitative approaches. Is it possible for both generalization and transferability to be achieved? And if it is, how? This is a mixed method study, and I think she mentioned yesterday that that's not her core, but I believe she'll be able to shed some light on that. Ma, if a study is convergent mixed method design, that means you're using both quantitative and qualitative approach. Is it possible for both generalization and transferability to be achieved? If yes, how?
Thank you for that question. Well, I think we have to go back to the goal of what you want to do and the quantity of data that you collect. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, I primarily focus on qualitative research. I don't do mixed method studies, but I believe that you could have both to answer your question. So sometimes it could be that you have an objective. It could be that you have an objective that, let's say you have a research question that you need to answer using qualitative study, and you have a research question that you need to answer using quantitative study. So in that sense, you can end up using a theoretical position that you can modify as appropriate. So it's very possible, but again, it has to go into the design of the study. But like I said, just to reiterate, mixed method research is not my area of expertise, so I'm not able to definitively tell you that, yes, this is what can happen, this is what can happen. But what I can say is, if you have a question that is specific to qualitative research and you do it as appropriate in a way that is consistent, then it is possible to answer that question within the broad framework of work that you're doing using qualitative data, being able to transfer it to the theory you want to modify. It's possible within that strand, but as a single unit, I don't know. I hope that is clear.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. I hope that answers your question. So let's move to the next one. Is it logical for a researcher to analyze data? That's the theme and the sub-theme, and another person to rubbish your analysis? I think this person is asking a question from experience. Okay, secondly.
Let me answer that first one.
Okay.
Well, it says, is it logical? And again, forgive my understanding here. I'm not really sure what they mean by rubbish the analysis. Is that to critically appraise it? Because if it is about critical appraisal, fine, people are going to critically appraise your work anyway. But if it is to dismiss it and discredit it, I mean, people do things for a logical reason, so I'm not really sure. But if I want to answer this with my scientific hat on, in other words, is it a logical process to discredit my work? The question is, it is inappropriate to do that. But again, it might be that what the person have access to is not the full picture. So there's a place for critical appraisal. There's a place for critical review in research. People would critique your work. Peer reviewers will critique your work. They will tell you they don't understand something. They will accuse you of doing things. They would, give you feedback that you may not find helpful. In that sense, once you have your research process properly documented and you have the audit trail to support your work, by all means, you can justify your decisions and what you've done. So I think that's what I understand this to mean. However, if you're talking about somebody just because they don't understand qualitative research, just dismiss your work as that's rubbish, you don't know what you're doing, this is nonsense, without giving you the opportunity to actually defend your work, then I would say that's inappropriate.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
So the second one, yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, so
So
the
there's
second
a
question,
question,
and
and
that
that's
says, is
is
the
the
result
result
from
from
qualitative
qualitative
research
research
just to
just to
add to
add
the
to the
body
body
of
of
knowledge,
knowledge,
or
or
you
you
can
can
write
write
I
authority.
mean,
I'm
the
sure the
person
person
means
means authoritative.
authoritatively,
cons-
okay,
Okay,
you
you
can
can
write
write
authority
authority
concerned
concerned
to
to
make
make
a
a
change.
change.
Please
Please
emphasize
emphasize.
more on the importance.
Okay. Um, I've just shared my screen. Can you see my screen? Let me make this full screen so that you can see.
Yes, you can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. So just to answer that question, I have put up here the slide that I shared earlier on about how I used the worked example that I shared to modify the sociological theory on domestic violence and abuse. Now, if you see here, if you can see my cursor here, I did one of the things that came out of the finding was the role of community groups and faith-based organizations, in other words, churches, to say that for migrant groups in the UK, for example, or even in other countries, if they were socialized in countries where they go to church or mosque or temples to ask for help, this is what they do. Now, what this has resulted into is that I have been able to work with government, the policymakers, and relevant stakeholders to begin to change the narrative about improving access of ethnic minority women to services. So I'm involved in projects looking at breast cancer awareness, uptake of services. And even though I did the research on domestic violence and abuse, the principles that we identified were applicable across all profiles because the indices is the same. A man or a woman experiencing domestic abuse, or if breast cancer or any form of cancer, they will just pray and pray and pray and pray. They will not go to the hospital on time, even though they have access. They will just be wishing it away. And so we have to develop programs, public health programs, health education and promotion strategies, working with churches and groups. So community groups there will be the Lagos Association of Lagos Indigene Group of UK something. So we work with these community groups to work with them to make sure that these groups, these migrant groups, have access. We work with them as a bridge. And I have several events as well. Like there's a policy roundtable event that is scheduled for July, where we have the deputy mayor of our region and some of the other policymakers in attendance to discuss how that can go into policy document to make sure that it becomes a mainstream thing that people do. So to answer your question, yes, you can have a body of knowledge, but beyond that, you can also work with the authorities concerned to make sure that relevant changes are made based on existing evidence. Now, I work within a context where we where research speaks, basically, where data speaks. So if you do qualitative research, we are not going to dismiss it as, but it's not generalizable. That's not what we are going to do. Like with the context where I work, people are not going to just say, oh, we need large numbers, we need data. Well, if you say we need data, we say qualitative research, discourse analysis, all of that is data. So you do this kind of work, you can tell us, you can take us from point A to point Z and tell us how it's applicable, we would take it. So it might be a case of context as well and places where research is done. But my understanding based on existing research within the context where I work is that yes, you can add to body of knowledge, but you can also write to authorities and you can work with them to make changes and to improve, health or life or outcomes based on research data. But of course, there are other strategies you need to have, the advocacy strategies and working with the government, working with policymakers, speaking truth to power. These are things that goes beyond just the data you collect and how you engage with them. Thank you. Yes, you can go to the next question. Yes. Oh, somebody said their question was skipped. Oh, is that the question about fuzzy set qualitative analysis? I'm not sure what that means. Can you provide more what you really mean by fuzzy set qualitative analysis? Okay, so while you're providing more information, I'm just going to go to the next one. Can ethnographic study have one objective? It can, yes. Again, it goes back to the research question. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? I mean, like I said, as a rule of thumb, in my research, I have more than one objective, but there's nothing that says you cannot have one objective. You know, so you can, it's your study, it's what you can do. Yes. Anything else? Any other question? Any more questions?
Thank you very much for the explanations, and thank you everyone for being here. I don't think we have any other question. I want to believe that this was an impactful section, and then you have noted down a lot of things to help improve your qualitative research. I think one of the general misconceptions about qualitative research, especially for those of us in social sciences and sciences, is to believe that it's just for a particular set of study, just for people in arts and all of that. But I hope that that myth was clearly taken down today, and then we can try and incorporate other style of research methods in making sure that we get an in-depth understanding of whatever it is that we are trying to understand. The slides will be provided, as we have said. There is also the recording available for the lectures. I would be sharing them. Please please use the password to access them so that we don't have repeated requests to open these or that. A password will be sent to access the recording, and please use your Babcock email so that you are able to access and watch again. And I wouldn't know if there are further questions that you want maybe in the course of going over the materials that you want the facilitator to explain, you may send to us via email. I will forward it to you. Also, she's very active. You know, she mentioned something about advocacy, and you'll see from my research studies that she's quite very practical and pragmatic about the areas that she explores. So she's much active on LinkedIn. You can always collaborate and connect with her so that, you know, perhaps you have things that you're working on that you need somebody to collaborate with you on. So thank you very much for being here, and we'll come to the end of the seminar today. I mean, that's all. We are not having another one tomorrow. So thank you very much. It was nice having you here. We'll close with a closing prayer, and I'll just go ahead to do that. Please let us pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for this opportunity to learn and to improve ourselves. We pray that everything that we have learned and so much more that we are going to explore, you help us, oh God, to improve in our research, to improve in our work. And at the end of it all, may we all have a focus, oh Lord, to glorify your holy name, because we have asked in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone, and remain blessed.